We start by seeing the story that 3 years ago the Demon Lord invaded Avalon. Although he controls a large part of the world, there is still hope. We see how the warrior Ruti Ragnarsson is facing a monster which she defeats with ease. While she does so, she is observed by 3 more warriors who do not interfere in the fight. Now our protagonist, whose name is Gideon, is in the forest collecting some healing herbs. Then he observes the town where he is, Zoltan. While walking he explains something about the small town and arrives at a shop which is the Warriors Guild. There he begins to sell the herbs he collected. Some warriors who are sitting there begin to ask him what he is doing, to which he then explains that he does not want to be a warrior but wants to open a pharmacy. Upon leaving he meets a child who speaks with him. Then he looks at some people who are in front and this makes him think about how skills are classified between warriors and mages. Later he arrives at his room and lying in his bed, he remembers his past and an old companion of his named Ares told him that he no longer needed him in his team because he was useless. Due to this event, the protagonist changed his name to Red and moved to that small town. After this, he stays thinking about the whole situation and then decides to go to sleep. The next day, he returns to the field to collect herbs, since his skill is survival and helps him be in the forest. At that moment, an owl bear attacks him, but he dodges it and decides to let it go. Then he arrives at the town again, where a knight named Albert together with his team offers him the opportunity to participate in a mission to hunt the owl bear. But he rejects him, informing him that what he desires is to have a quiet life and set up a pharmacy. While he goes to sell what he collected, his sister Ruti is in the middle of several people and thinks of him. Upon arriving at his house he sees that he needs to save for a while longer to set up his pharmacy. At this moment they knock on his door. When he opens it he sees that it is Gons who calls him to attend to Tanta who is sick. The protagonist arrives and when he checks him he realizes that they have to give him the medicine quickly. Gons asks him to go look for it in the mountains and then he will reward him. The protagonist accepts and goes using his skills since no one sees him and avoiding the group of warriors seeing him. He arrives at the place where he can look for the herbs and when he is collecting them the owl bear attacks him, but he defeats it easily with his sword and leaves. Albert and his team arrive where the defeated owl bear is and they find it curious that it is defeated. The protagonist brings the things to Tanta and he recovers. When he leaves their Gons follows him and thanks him. Then they stay talking about his reward. For months later, a warrior named Rit, who is blonde, arrives at the guild shop. She begins to speak with the girl who attends and among other things they begin to talk about the protagonist and what he has done. On the other hand, the protagonist finally inaugurates his shop. The people of the town who celebrate with him are there so he thanks them and says that he has started his quiet life. On a rainy day, the protagonist is in his pharmacy alone since no customers have arrived. At that moment the blonde enters, the one he recognizes as Rit and she in turn recognizes him by his true name Gideon. They look alike. Then at the protagonist's house drinking tea, Rit is a princess and tells him that she is now enjoying freedom as an adventurer. Then the protagonist tells her what happened with his team, to which she becomes indignant about it. He goes to heat up her tea that got cold and when he returns and gives it to her, she comments on something and blushes. This makes the boy start remembering how he met her. It was some time ago in a town where he was with his old team planning some things. At that moment a man begins to bother a girl who was sitting, but she defended herself and then introduced herself to the protagonist's old group as Rit and then left. Subsequently, the protagonist stops remembering and continues talking to the girl. While they talk about how they express their true feelings, they begin to remember a time they were in a forest fulfilling a mission. They talked about some attacks they had suffered and then the protagonist gave her some cookies that he himself had made, for which she told him they were good. That is why she alleges that she does express her feelings. The protagonist now reminds her of a time when she didn't and she gets a little ashamed. Then the protagonist remembers his confrontation against Jasandan, which was something not very good in the Duchy of Lokovia. The protagonist was with his group. Rit and some lords were planning an attack against the demon army. When Rit did it, it turned out to be a trap, but the protagonist helped her and then Ruti arrived and defeated the demon. After that, the protagonist encouraged her to continue in the fight since she had become discouraged seeing her royal companions. The protagonist stops remembering and they have finished the tea. In addition, he adds that in that fight they managed to emerge victorious. Now he tells her that he will prepare something for her to eat. At that moment the girl asks him for a job in his pharmacy and they begin to talk about it. Then they go to the pharmacy part and begin to see some of the products. The protagonist tells her that she can work there, so the girl promises him that she will never leave him alone and will help him. When they are already having dinner, she starts talking and the girl tells him that she will move in there with him, which makes him terrified. On the other hand, the protagonist's old team is in a camp in the desert. In this, Aries brings a girl and introduces her as Tiss and informs that she will be the protagonist's replacement. He begins to talk about the girl's skills, and at that moment another one stands up and introduces himself as Danon. The other girl does the same and introduces herself as Theodora. Then Ruti comes out of a tent and introduces herself and informs him that she will have to obey her and informs him that the next day they will go on a mission. The next day the protagonist wakes up on the floor. When he gets up he sees Rit in his bed and blushes. The protagonist prepares breakfast and when Rit gets up they proceed to have breakfast together. She is amazed by the food he cooked. Then both begin to make plans for what they will do that day and upon finishing the meal they go to do things. They go talking on the way about the past and arrive at a store where they sell furniture. The owner greets Rit and asks her what she is doing with him. She informs him that she moved into his house and will buy a bed. The man starts joking. The protagonist blushes, then Rit chooses a large comfortable bed, but the protagonist tells her scared to make sure to choose a single one. So the man and Rit call him a wimp. Rit buys a bed and asks the store owner to take it to them since it doesn't fit in her inventory. Then they withdraw from there and go talking about other things. On the way, they hear a fight. At that moment they see that it is Tonta being beaten by a big boy. The protagonist steps in and tells him to stop already, since due to his skill he should be fighting with warriors. The boy gets aggressive and throws a stone at him, but he avoids it with his sword. The boy and his companions run away, so the protagonist stays talking to Tonta and his friend whom he introduces as Ol. The protagonist heals Ol's knee and then he and Rit give them an explanation about skills and encourage them. The children leave and the protagonist and Rit do the same. While speaking both now arrive at the building where they will ask for their medicine to be approved and the permit to sell. Speaking with a man, he rejects it quickly. Then Rit gives him the idea of speaking with his superior since she knows him. They head to him and he explains why the first man denied it, since a month ago a medicine that was approved is now used illegally. Even so, the man tells them that he will approve it because it involves Rit. When they leave there the protagonist thanks Rit. Then they arrive at his house and while they eat they think of a product that they can sell easily. At that moment Rit tells him that since he cooks very well he could sell food too. This makes something occur to the protagonist, so he begins to make some medicinal cookies. When he finishes and they taste them they realize that they turned out delicious, and that is how they will be sold. The next day they begin to sell them. At first, the people were suspicious, but when they tasted them they realized that they were good and bought them all. So the protagonist lifts Rit by the waist and thanks her for the idea. In the desert camp, Danon stresses to Aries that it was a bad idea to expel the protagonist, so he asks him to look for him. Hearing them, Ruti comes out of her tent and asks Danon to look for her brother. Then he decides to go do it thanks to a chat he also had with Theodora about the protagonist. The protagonist wakes up the other day in his bed and stays looking at Rit who sleeps in the one she bought. At that moment she wakes up and when she sees him observing her she says good morning. When they begin to do the day's chores in the morning the protagonist thinks about how well things are going and then they go to have breakfast. Later in the store, 3 warriors arrive who remain very amazed to see Rit there and even one of them runs out upon finding out. Then Rit asks the protagonist for permission to go buy a type of liquor called mead so he tells her that it is fine and she leaves. While the protagonist prepares a mixture and thinks about dinner, the warrior Albert enters the pharmacy. He begins to belittle the protagonist and his pharmacy to then interrogate him. He asks him if it was he who killed the owlbear. The protagonist denies it but he keeps insisting, until he takes out his weapon and threatens him. The protagonist falls to the ground and does not defend himself so that they do not discover him, to which Albert says that he thought about recruiting him, but no longer. At that moment Rit enters. She attacks Albert breaking his sword and threatening him. At that moment the protagonist tells her to calm down and explains, so Albert leaves. Later at his house, the protagonist and Rit talk about their new achievements and plans. The next day the protagonist finds himself in a sauna with the furniture salesman and Gons. They compete over who can withstand more heat. They talk about the protagonist with his new partner Rit and in the end, Gons faints due to the intense heat. Outside of there, they ask the owner about the lack of customers. He, who is an old man named Sev, explains to them that someone set up a new spy and everyone goes only there now. The whole group encourages the old man to continue with his business since they will continue attending and they buy him beers. Later, while they are at Gonza's house, Rit talks to Tonta and his mom about how they could help Sev with his business. At that moment the protagonist serves them a cup of tea and they begin to talk about its pleasant aroma. At that moment an idea occurs to the protagonist for sauna. They arrive at the old man's sauna and the protagonist proposes the idea of aromatic herbs for the sauna since it will bring customers. They put the herbs there and when they begin to take effect with the steam he is amazed and claims that it will work. As thanks, he tells him that he will buy his herbs from him and tells them that they can use the sauna for free. The protagonist is now inside enjoying his new idea. At that moment Rit and Tanner's mom enter in towels. He blushes and tells them that he will leave but is stopped by the girls and everyone sits down to enjoy the sauna. Tanner's mom now starts telling Rit that she chose the protagonist well, so he blushes to such a point that when Rit touches him with her shoulder he faints. Later quite a few customers begin to arrive at the sauna. Inside are the protagonist, Gons, and the furniture store owner whom they now call Storm again. They begin to compete again and in the end, Storm faints. Now the protagonist goes with Rit to the house and while they watch the sunset he comments that the mead she bought he did thinking of a custom that those who get married have. She blushes but the protagonist tells her calmly to go home. Still in the desert, the old team finds themselves complaining about not having the protagonist. Theodora comments to Tis that the whole team has crumbled because the protagonist is not there. While Rit and the protagonist are arranging things in the store to open, they knock on the door and when they open they realize that outside there are many people and in front a man in a suit. The man introduces himself as Gallatin, superior officer of the Adventurers Guild. He requests to want to speak with Rit, but the protagonist tells him that they can do so when the store has opened, so they decide to wait. Once Rit finished arranging some things she opens the store and she goes out to speak with Gallatin and the others. A man enters the store offering the protagonist a coin that is too valuable in exchange for him staying away from Rit, but the protagonist rejects the offer saying that the girl is worth much more. On the other hand, the men offer Rit innumerable things in exchange for her going back to the original guild. She rejects everything and says that she will never leave the protagonist. Once inside the store, the guys begin to talk about what happens, so the protagonist gives a gift to Rit and both remain talking a little embarrassed. Two men are now talking about the disadvantages of Rit being on her own. One of them offers the other a reward to eliminate that problem, to which he accepts. In the store, Rit finds herself thinking that she didn't imagine ending up living with the protagonist. At that moment she begins to remember when they went on a mission together with the whole group. Thanks to the protagonist's plan everything went very well. When they arrived at a forest he had contacted an elf girl who would help them in the forest. Her name was Yarandrola. While they walked she invited her to take a bath in a river and both went. Yarandrola begins to ask her if she feels something for the protagonist. She denies it but after a long conversation admits that she does and they return with the group. While they walk they see that because of Ares an army of the Demon King ambushed them. They begin to fight and from there Rit realizes Ruti's power. When the protagonist finished, she hugs him, so Rit decided not to join so as not to interfere between her and her brother and decided to stay to help fix the city. Rit finished remembering and while she is there the protagonist reminds her that she has to make a delivery, so she goes out to take it. While on the way Rit runs into one of the men who was planning something and he tells her to return to being an adventurer or to her city. He begins to talk about the protagonist so she hits him and defeats him. When she arrives again the protagonist welcomes her and then they go to have dinner together. On the other hand, Ruti finds herself alone in her tent while she misses her brother. She remembers that Ares gave her the news that he would leave, but she doubted him and hit him very hard thinking that he had done something bad to her brother. Ares was left wounded on the wall but she approaches and heals him. Thinking about that the girl feels the void left by her brother. The protagonist is in Dr. Newman's office talking about an order and at that moment they hear a loud noise and a scream. The doctor goes out with the protagonist to check and they arrive at a house. They see that it is a young man named Jackson. The protagonist gives him a medicine and they see a paper with a powder that they take to analyze. They take Jackson to the office and Newman informs the protagonist that he suffered an overdose and that the medicine he gave him was what managed to save him. When the protagonist arrives at the pharmacy, Rick tells him why he took so long and that she is very hungry. He tells her that he will explain later and invites her to eat. When they are already eating they begin to talk about what happened and the protagonist explains that it was the drug that is circulating. And then he invites her to have fun at the river. She gets excited and accepts, so they go. Upon arriving they begin to play in the water. Then they make a meal and, while they are sitting they begin to talk about themselves. In the end, he holds the girl's hand and they give each other a peck. On the other hand, in the desert, the protagonist's old team is talking about their destiny. Ruti moves away from the group and Tis begins to speak with her skill. She tells her that due to her blessing she does not have any feelings, she doesn't even need to sleep or eat. Back at the pharmacy, the protagonist and Rit comment that they enjoyed the day, and at that moment a wounded man enters. The protagonist attends to him while Rit goes to investigate who provoked it. Following the trail of blood, she finds several wounded people and the one causing them is one of Albert's assistants. At that moment Tamor appear and begin to attack the girl. She defends herself very well, but at that moment arrows come out that kill those men. It was Albert. He approaches her and begins to mock the protagonist, so Rit gets angry but drops her knives and tells him that that is a right not to kill him. Once in the pharmacy, Rit is lying on the protagonist's lap and they are talking about what happened and what could have caused that. Suddenly Ol and Tonto appear, who begin to talk with them and they invite them to eat. Inside the house, the protagonist serves food to everyone and they proceed to eat while talking about Ol's skills. This child is a little worried about his skill, but the protagonist and Rit advise him and manage to calm him down a bit. Being in the store, a girl named Ria arrives. She is from Albert's group, so she apologizes for what happened. Then she begins to mention to them how worried she is that Albert is leaving, but the protagonist manages to calm her down. On the other hand, in a bar, Danon is found. A man arrives and introduces himself as B and tells him that he is also looking for the protagonist and invites him to look for him together. While it rains, the protagonist and Rit are in their house drinking milk with honey. Seeing that, the protagonist remembers when he and his sister were in a shelter for little ones and she asked him for milk with honey and felt happy despite not showing feelings. The memory ends because they knock on the door. When they open, they are amazed to see Newman in the rain carrying Ol, who is injured, in a room. They lay the child down and heal him. They talk about what could have happened to him, but at that moment he wakes up scared and says that a demi entered his house with an axe and attacked his family. The protagonist runs out to their house and upon arriving with Dr. Newman he realizes that the child's parents are on the floor but without serious injuries. This triggered a series of events and they left the child to the protagonist and Rit to protect him. In their house, they are eating and to cheer Ol up, Rit tells him that she will help him train with the sword, so they go out to the patio and begin to do so. While they are in the patio, Gomes and Tanner's mom arrive. She is very alarmed and informs them that the guards took the child a demi without explaining the reason. They in turn go at once to see what happened. When they arrive at Gallatin's office they manage to get him to help them with an order to speak with the guards. When they arrive there with the order they manage to speak with the person in charge and he apologizes to them since he didn't know how they had handled the situation. Then he explains to them that they were looking for information about what happened and at that moment Tonto says that he had spoken with a demi and he had even apologized, so they don't believe it was this boy. When they are in private, the protagonist, Rit, and the commander, who is a demi's dad, begin to speak. The boy asks the man if he knows if his son has consumed that drug. He becomes indignant and tells him no, but then they continue talking about the possibilities. When they leave Ol at the pharmacy, a strange man with something on one eye arrives and speaks with him. When the protagonist arrives home, he does so without Rit. He begins to train with Ol and at nightfall, he is tired and they begin to talk about the reason why the protagonist does not have a high rank. Ol comments to the protagonist that a man gave him a sword. This is the same one who arrived when he was alone in the pharmacy. Rit goes down the street chasing a man whom she catches and takes away something he stole. When he is on the ground, he explodes and covers Rit with slime. At that moment, more men arrive who attack her, but she is protected by a man. When she sees him, it is Danon. They begin to talk and he asks her not to tell the protagonist. She accepts and leaves, but this suspicious Danon is plotting something bad. Upon arriving home, Rit sits on the protagonist's legs and they begin to talk. In the end, she tells him that she wants to be with him forever, feeling a little bad about something, but doesn't tell the protagonist. The next day, they take also the blacksmith can make him a weapon since they analyzed the other one and it has a suspicious spell. When they leave there, they see a protest and one of the warriors is there, but he is suspicious, as if it weren't him. On the other hand, Ruti and her companions are facing a giant demon. Ares realizes the lack of the protagonist for him to be able to work well. At that moment, Tis appears and everyone leaves in a type of ship or vessel that flies. At night in his house, the protagonist and Rit find themselves in their room with their new double bed. They lie down and after talking a little, they give each other a peck and fall asleep. The next day, Rit goes walking down an alley. She goes all covered. At that moment, some men surround her believing she is the child Ol. When she takes off what covers her, the men get annoyed since Ol's sword had a tracker and she is carrying it. So these men begin to attack Rit. She defeats them, and when only one is left, he turns into a type of monster. At the pharmacy, Big Hawk's men, who was the one who gave the sword to all, arrive and take the child, who is alone at that moment. Tied up, they take him to Big Hawk. He begins to give him an explanation about his power and tells the child that he wants to turn him into a hero, but his intentions are clearly otherwise. At that moment, he takes a demi out of a room tied up, who asks all for forgiveness for having taken the drug that makes them aggressive. Then Big Hawk takes both children out to a balcony. In the courtyard, they see many people gathered who have been protesting. So when they see Big Hawk come out, they see him as their leader. He gives them a speech and says he brings justice for what Ademi did. So he gives Ol a sword to kill the other child. But what he does is release him. Ademi gets up and, as an effect of the drug, grabs an axe to kill Ol. But at that moment, the protagonist arrives and with his skill takes the children from there. Later in the pharmacy, the protagonist gives a remedy to Ademi to counteract the effects of the drug. Then Be arrives there, who tells the protagonist that he will take the children according to the plan, and he accepts. At that moment, Albert arrives together with Big Hawk. They begin to talk and Albert attacks the protagonist. He dodges it very well, and at that moment Big Hawk begins to reveal his plans to him. So then he invites the protagonist to join him. He rejects him and Albert wants to attack him. Before the attack, the protagonist reveals that he brought the guard. So they arrive to take Albert and Big Hawk. Albert doesn't want to be defeated like a delinquent, so he attacks the protagonist. But he dodges it and ends up cutting off the hand where he holds the sword. Albert is left lamenting on the ground, and then they take them away. Bear took the children to where the people in protest were, and Ol clarified the situation so that they would leave Ademi alone and thus managed to calm them. Later in his house, the protagonist and Rit are testing the new double tub. While they do it, the protagonist reveals how much he loves her, saying that he would never leave her side. On the other hand, in prison, Bear arrives to see Big Hawk and calls him by his real name, Shisandon. He takes off Big Hawk's body, turning into a type of demon monster. Then he goes to where Albert is and makes him sign a contract with him. The protagonist, Rit, and Tonta say goodbye to Ol since he will join the team of apprentice heroes. Meanwhile, in the desert, Albert arrives at Ruti's tent and she ends up pointing her sword at them. In the desert, Theodora and Ares realize that Ruti has taken the airship together with Tis. They don't worry much, but upon entering her tent they realize she left something important. Meanwhile, Ruti and Tis go in the airship to another place. In the town, they return from selling some things at the guild and inform him that he has risen to rank B. The warriors who are there feel a little jealous and begin to talk about how fast this subject has risen in rank. In the airship, Tis remembers her past and at that moment begins to speak with Ruti. She remembers the night before in which she spoke with Shisandon and tried the drug, since it would not affect her. So now she is heading to Zoltan to look for more of it because of the properties it has. The protagonist and Rit find themselves in the empty store since due to the cold no customers have arrived. They think of a way to make something sell for the cold, to which it occurs to Rit to make hand warmers, and they proceed to make them. The protagonist goes with them and succeeds in selling them all to different people. At night, when he goes on his way home very cold, he meets Rit. She preserves a hand warmer and while it begins to snow both hold hands with the object and walk. They arrive at a bench on the road where they sit to look at the snow. The protagonist covers Rit with his cape and in the end, they give each other a peck. Tis and Ruti arrive at a forest near the town where they leave the airship, disguise themselves and use nicknames to enter Zoltan unnoticed. Upon arriving at a bridge, there is a guard who does not want to let them pass if they don't pay. Ruti tells him that there is no need to pay to pass. He attacks, but she very easily throws him into the river with a pull. Later, the protagonist passes by there and this man is alone in his underwear and very cold. He tries to attack the protagonist, but he grabs him and throws him into the river again. Then Ruti and Tis arrive at the town with a monster they hunted. The gatekeeper attends to them and then at night the protagonist arrives and this gatekeeper invites him to have a drink. They arrive at a stall that serves food and drink. There Tis arrives and the protagonist believes it is a child keeping a secret. She thinks the same of the protagonist, so they suspect each other. Tis arrives at the room and tells everything to Ruti. She mentions that they must be careful and they plan to get the person who prepares the drug out of jail. The next day a fairy from the pharmacy arrives and asks the protagonist for help, and they go with her and arrive at a fairy village and help a chief fairy who is of water. Ruti and Tis take the man who makes the drug out of jail and she asks him to make more. Then they go home and the next day they say they have to look for something in a pharmacy. So Tis tells her that there is one there. The protagonist attends to Gons in the pharmacy and at that moment Tis enters and behind her Ruti. When she and the protagonist stay looking at each other they are surprised. He recognizes her and she runs towards him, calling him brother. Ruti hugs her brother very tight, so Tis reveals his real name Gideon, to which Gonz is confused. Then the protagonist takes his sister and Tis home and they begin to talk. She asks him to join the group again since things have not gone well at all. The protagonist refuses, telling her that now he wants to stay there, mentioning the pharmacy, and Ruti understands but informs him that she will also stay in the town. At that moment Rit arrives and is amazed to see Ruti. They begin to talk about everything while drinking tea. At that moment they worrying that the protagonist might leave, so he tells her no and informs her that he will move to the town. Ruti finally says goodbye and leaves with Tis, but while they are on the way Ruti gets something that makes her have to take a little more of the drug. The protagonist and Rit remain talking while looking at the sunset. They talk about the decision the protagonist will have to take. At the inn where Ruti is, Tis arrives and begins to talk with the man they took out to prepare drugs. Then she goes and starts talking to Ruti. She approaches her wanting to take Tis's pet, to which she thinks she will do something bad to it. In the end, they resolve that it was a misunderstanding and remain as companions and friends. On the other hand, Bed is doing something suspicious in his house. Next, when customers arrive at the pharmacy and see Ruti, they run away scared by her serious face. The protagonist invites his sister to go out, so Tis and Rit remain in the pharmacy. The protagonist takes his sister to the sauna. Their Seva tends to them and they enjoy the steam for a while. Then when they finish, people stay admiring Ruti for the way she dried her body. The protagonist and she leave there and keep walking. Having such a good time, Ruti would wish that that day never ended, but the reality is that she is the heroine. On the other hand, Theodora and Ares head to look for Ruti with Albert's help. She encourages the boy and, among other things, tells him she will look for a hand for him. Already at the house, the protagonist serves the three girls milk with honey, then tells them to try the tub and take a shower before leaving. Ruti accepts and tells him to go with her. The protagonist refuses, saying that they are already old enough for that, to which Ruti invites Rit. She accepts and Tis also joins them. Inside the tub, Ruti starts asking Rit about her relationship with the protagonist. She answers while Tis listens attentively. Ruti begins to tell them something that happened to her in childhood and how her brother saved her. She tells them that she is not capable of feeling many things and begins to cry. Rit calms her down a bit while Tis thinks about finding a way to help Ruti be happy. In the house, the protagonist thanks Tis for being his sister's friend, to which she says she will trust him and Rit. So she will tell them what she knows regarding Ruti. She tells him about her problem now that she tried the drug. So they propose to help her and go look for the one who makes it, whom Ruti has hidden in some fortress of the elves. Theodora, Ares, and Albert arrive at the port. There they begin to walk in disguise. Ares says he will go look for an inn and on the way Bee sees him. On the other hand, the girl and Albert walk there in the port. They see the protagonist, but with a spell, they make themselves invisible. At that moment Danon arrives and greets the protagonist, but he is missing a hand. They begin to talk, to which the protagonist informs him that he will not return to the team. Then he informs him that Ruti is there and tells him that she is going through a problem. Both leave there and then to be able to help Ruti. Danon arrives at the room where Ares is, but with two normal hands. He informs him that the protagonist is there and takes him to his pharmacy. When he arrives, he begins to destroy everything inside and then they leave there to look for Ruti, while Danon and the protagonist run to where Ruti is. He tells him how he lost his hands, saying that Shisandan is alive and is taking the form of other people. At that moment they see a dragon pass and on it go Ares and the fake Danon, who is actually Shisandan. The protagonist runs and catches up to Rit and Tis, who go on to small dragons. He tells them what happened, so Rit realizes that the other time she spoke with Shisandan. They agree to fight again due to that, so the protagonist runs ahead and arrives at the entrance of the elf ruin. Upon entering, he begins to explore in it, arrives at a room where the one who prepares the drug is and makes him scream, so that Ruti arrives. When she does so with her sword, upon realizing that it is her brother, they begin to talk. The protagonist gives her encouraging words without judging her for what she did, also tells her that she can choose her life. When they are leaving there, Rit arrives together with Tis. They begin to talk a little and at that moment a wave of small eye-shaped monsters arrives. Ruti destroys them and goes to look for who sent them. Following her goes the protagonist, who tells Rit to stay with Tis and the drug man. When Ruti and her brother arrive, they see that it is Ares. He begins to tell the girl to leave with him. She refuses, so he attacks the protagonist, leaving him wounded, and tells him that now he can go. To his surprise, Ruti draws her sword and buries it in Ares and threatens him not to hurt her brother again. She leaves Ares there wounded and goes and heals her brother. After this, they leave and leave Ares there. Shisandan now turns into Berg and invites Ares to join him. Ares goes walking with Berg while thinking about the purpose he had of fighting alongside the heroine Ruti. The protagonist and his companions begin to plan how to stop Shisandan and retire to do so. On the other hand, Danon enters the base with Theodora and Albert. They begin to look for their enemy and Danon destroys some doors until reaching a type of tunnel. Ares and Berg are in a room into which Danon suddenly enters and attacks Berg. He sees no opportunity against his attacks, so he asks Ares for help. He makes an attack that weakens Danon, so Berg takes advantage and buries the sword in the boy. He transforms into Shisandan and begins to attack Danon again, and although he defends himself, he ends up being defeated by Shisandan remaining wounded. While he retreats with Ares, Shisandan takes Ares to a room he opens, and inside is a capsule with swords of the first warrior. He gives one to Ares and instructs him to make Ruti grab it so that she agrees to go with him. Also tells him that he has to kill the protagonist. When the protagonist and the others arrive at a room, Shisandan appears to attack them together with Ares. Ruti turns out to be very strong and protects her brother and the others. She breaks Shisandan and Ares' swords. When Theodora and Albert arrive and see Danon on the ground, they attend to him and give him a medicine so his wound can heal. Into the room where they are fighting enters Theodora and begins to face Ruti, telling her that she has to continue being the heroine. She ties up Rit and Shisandan's dragon grabs her. The protagonist sees himself in a tight situation about whom to help, but at that moment Rit frees herself and tries to make Theodora understand. She does not accept and continues attacking, but he, fearful for Ruti, wounds her with his sword. Ares takes advantage of the opportunity and throws the protagonist together with Rit down a type of elevator. While Shisandan fights with Ruti, Ares celebrates having defeated the protagonist, so he wounds Tis and Albert, then steps on her spider pet. Since Danon realizes that Rit and the protagonist are falling, he helps them with his power, making them go up again. Ares, seeing him, begins to attack him madly and the protagonist also attacks him, but he does a type of magic that hurts him and Rit. When Ares is going to make an attack, he realizes that he is held by the spider web of Tis's pet, so the protagonist manages to defeat him by cutting his hands and his chest. Ruti continues fighting in another underground room with Shisandan. He manages to break her sword now, but she brings out a power and begins to attack him. For this, she grabs a sword that he had dropped. Shisandan rejoices, seeing that he managed to get her to grab the sword, and she, in the end, cuts off Shisandan's head. The protagonist gives a healing to Theodora. While speaking with the others, Ruti comes out with the sword, unable to control herself. She attacks the protagonist, but Tis intervenes, receiving the cut, so he tells her not to do it, but Ruti stays staring without any expression. The protagonist stays with Tis in his arms while looking strangely at his sister. He tells the others to attend to her and he begins to face his sister. After a moment, he manages to make her drop the sword and she returns to normal. She begins to cry, and when she sees what she did to Tis, she tries to heal her, but her power does not allow it, so she cries for her friend. Theodora recovers and heals the girl. After talking about what happened, Ruti instructs her to be the new heroine since she was born for it. After that, already in the town, Ruti admires the snow and feels the cold after so much time. The protagonist and Rit invite her and Tis to eat. While they eat, they talk about what happened and their future plans. Among other things, Ruti reminds the protagonist that they will go to the funeral, so Rit informs him that she will stay since she agreed to go fix all the mess Ares made. Later, the old team goes to Ares' funeral in the church. When they leave there, they remain talking about how strange it was that Danon could wield that sword. Then they go home. Gon's already fixed everything. Then the protagonist begins to talk with Rit while they are alone. She worries in case he decides to leave one day, but the protagonist affirms that he loves her and that he will never leave. Then both are in their room talking and playing, telling each other how much they love each other and share a romantic night. The next day, Ruti and Van look for her brother since they agreed to go out together. Both go out and spend a pleasant day. He gives his sister a pendant. They go out to eat, and when the drug man sees them, he runs away. In the end, they remain in a meadow admiring the day. Just like them enjoying the day, everyone in the town does so thanks to their efforts. Later in the pharmacy, the four are working: Rit, the protagonist, Ruti, and Tis. While they rest, the guild girl arrives and informs them that some bears attacked some warriors, so Ruti goes willing to help of her own free will. The protagonist tells her to ask him for something for when she returns, to which his sister tells him to save milk with honey for her. In the end, in the forest, which is the man who made the drug, with a girl. He says how much he likes the town, and when the girl is focused, it is Yarandrola who says she is anxious to see the protagonist, Rit, and all her friends.
But well, if you've made it this far, comment the word Daisuki to let me know you've reached the end. Here on the screen, I leave you with these 2 cool videos, just like the person watching this video. See you next time. Take care, drink water, take a shower, and bye.